All right. Nice to see everybody. Welcome to the CLMP Midsummer check-in. This is something we've added a couple years ago that it's kind of nice to, as we're all collecting collecting samples and out on our lakes, there's always some questions about protocols and how did we drop off here and what's the schedule for that. And so we're hoping that we can provide some clarity with this 1 hour event. What we are going to be doing first is that Joe and I will be presenting a very brief presentation, just some reminders and some things that we're seeing. But we're really here to answer questions that all of you might have. And so we'll briefly present and then we'll have a good amount of time for question and answer. Before we move on, if you're having any problems with audio or visual or with Zoom, please check the help desk. You can see that information right over here. Make sure you remain on mute unless you're asking a question, just so we don't have background noise. And for asking questions, feel free, you can choose click on the chat icon and you can type in questions, and you can do that throughout the entire event. Or feel free to click on reactions and raise your hand if you'd like to verbally ask a question. Some questions might be more complex and easier heard than typed out. So feel free to do that, and we'll answer your questions. So let's begin the check-in. We'll start with a nice question. Does anyone know what this plant is is that my finger? Who knows? I'll say my finger. Does anyone know what this plant is? Is your practice of unmuting or clicking the chat?
Is that a bulb from a starry stonewort?
That's right. That is a bulb of starry stonewort right there. So you can get the scale of things, kind of a small structure, but an obvious structure. Okay, so we're going to now go through kind of a list of things. And the first thing that I want to start off with is about assisting volunteers. Many of us on our lakes collecting data, it's not just one person, there's multiple of us, which is what we promote. Many hands make light work. And so if that is the case, we would love to know who are the volunteers. And an assisting volunteer is somebody who helps consistently throughout the year or just periodically throughout the year. And so it helps us keep track. It helps us to recognize the work of those folks. And then also we do ask these assisting volunteers to sign a waiver. And so that's important. It's a waiver through the Michigan Lakes and Streams Association. And it's just like for any volunteer work, we are out on the boat. And so it's nice to have those signed. And so in order to do that, it's much like what a lead volunteer goes through. You will end up going into MiCorps.net. You will create your account as a step one. And then what you choose is assisting volunteer down here. And finish and sign the waiver, and you're good to go with the account. But what we've noticed on some of our assisting volunteers, when they create an account, we also like to link the lake to their account. And so if you are assisting volunteer on this call, or if you have assisting volunteers, once they create an account, please have them sign back into their account. And then this screen pops up. This screen looks like what it looks like for lead volunteers as well. But then click Start Here and add the lake that they are assisting volunteer for. And so this is helpful because then when the CLMP team is communicating with individuals, it's good to know a name to a lake. And that's also helpful for entering data as well. So step one would be sign into the account. Step two, add your lake to your account. So folks are already entering data in real time, which is nice, but you can also add it at the end of the year. We like to have data entered before October 31st. But I just want to give a quick little review about entering your data, how to do that, and then also accessing that data to double check it so that we make sure the data that has been inputted is correct. And so step one, go to MiCorps.net, hover over data exchange, that's our database, and go to enter data. The next screen, what you're going to do is click lakes, which is in the top left corner. Once you choose lakes, what's going to pop up are the list of lakes that you are associated with. You can click on your lake. So in this example, I would click on Badger Lake. That comes up with step 4, where let's say if I just did Secchi disk, I would click on Secchi, and then you have a chance to enter the data. And the entry looks a little different for each of the parameters. One note on Score the Shore. The background of our database, how it works for entering data, is that you need to enter it all in one period of time. You can't enter part, log out, and log back in and enter. You would have to restart all of that. So that can be terribly frustrating if you're on a large lake that has 30,000 foot sections. So I encourage you to be prepared to complete it all in one sitting for Score the Shore.
Hey, Eric, I'm going to interrupt you with a question about assisting volunteer registration that showed up in the chat.
For sure.
And yeah, I can cover the question too. So Bruce said he's an assisting volunteer, but when he created his account, he went to associate his lake with his assisting volunteer account, and it wasn't listed. It didn't show up when he looked at the list. What probably is happening there is that when you're an assisting volunteer, the only lakes you'll see in the list are lakes that are enrolled and paid for the current year. So if your lead volunteer either hasn't signed up your lake, in this case, you said it was Swan Lake, then you won't be able to add it to your lake until the lead volunteer has enrolled the lake and completed payment for this year. So as soon as that is complete, it will automatically show up in the list of lakes that assisting volunteers can choose from.
Thanks, Joe. And yes, if you have questions about payment and if they've occurred, feel free to email me, and then I'll get that answer to you. Notices have most lakes have paid, but for those that haven't, that happens, and so notices have been sent out and reminders for that. Okay, so now that the data is entered, just like we care about data quality when we're actually collecting the data, we need to care about the quality once it's in our database. And so we encourage you, once you've entered something, go back into our database and double check what was just entered to make sure, like, oh no, I was supposed to put 1 foot and I put 10. That's very easy to do. And so double checking data is important for quality. And those are the sort of things that are not easy to pick up after the fact. So what you do for that is go hover back over data exchange, and instead of entering data, you view data. Then this screen pops up. You will now get to choose your lake. And by the way, this process here, this is another way to access all of your data. So, you can access your data through your individual lake reports, but you can also access all of the raw data, all of the samples you've collected here in the database. So you click on lakes. You can then click on name. For my example, I did Badger, and then I click on it, and Badger gets put over into this box. Let's say I only do Secchi, so I clicked on Secchi and click View Results. So that's how you get to your lake and your data. And then this is what that site looks like. And you can look at, here's my Badger, and yep, I'm in Alcona County, and that's my field ID. Yep, so that's all correct. And then I can look at and say, okay, I entered for January 1st. So there might be an issue there. So you can click on that, see what's all happening there, and make adjustments. Now, how do you make adjustments? The only way to make adjustments is now to contact us and lay it out what happened. You maybe take a picture or scan your data sheet so it's all nice and clear, or just do it in the email, and then we'll go in and make those adjustments. And again, this is a great way, first of all, to double check your data, but then also to see your data. So for example, when you're on this page, you can click on the text that has an underline. So that's a link that you can then enter into another page, and it gives you all of those details. Also, what's nice is you can click View Graph, and it will give you a summary graph of your data as well. So it's a great tool to have. Shifting gears a little bit, just to let everyone know, is that most of the parameters are you can't sign up for any more parameters for this year, except for 2, the Exotic Aquatic Plant Watch, which is our early detection plant survey, and Score the Shore, which is our shoreline habitat survey. You can sign up for these on your lake up until the end of August. And so that's great because you might learn about it. You might feel like, hey, I have some extra time. I would love to do these parameters, so you can do so. You just go back into your account and enroll and pay. Also, we're all talking amongst each other. We talk to other lakes who may not be a part of the CLMP. And these parameters might be, since they can sign up throughout the season, this might be a way to recruit other lakes in. And when we talk about invasive plants, that's actually kind of an important piece. So let's say Craig is talking to a lake that drains into his lake in Portage. And he might say, well, it might be nice to know if there are invasive species over there, because invasive species can move amongst lakes, especially lakes that are close to one another. And so even strategically, it's nice to be able to have as many lakes in the plant watch, but then also Score the Shore around you. So
I'm gonna interrupt you again.
Yeah.
So Kurt had an observation that he put into the chat. He noted that when you're entering your SECI data, putting in the time that you did every measurement is really tedious in our current system. And I want to tell Kurt that we agree. The way that it's set up right now, you have to use pull down menus to say what hour, the minute, and it is tedious. And the good news is we're in the process of redesigning a lot of aspects of our website, and that is something that we're aware of, and we will be fixing that. So it'll be much easier where you can type in times instead of having to pull down and click for every time that you're trying to enter.
Life will be easier. That Score the Shore note I mentioned earlier, that will be fixed as well. So there will be, I think we're all looking forward to having a better system to input the data. Thanks, Joe. Okay, so speaking of the plant watch, and you already saw a real life photo of that with that star-shaped bulb in my finger in previous slides. But this has seemed to be a year of starry stonewort. Joe and I have a project up in northern Michigan looking at aquatic plants, and we are finding a lot of starry stonewort. I've gone out on a couple side-by-sides. I don't know if any of you are on here. I think 2 out of the 3 side-by-sides so far have had starry stonewort. 1, a new invasion, so an unknown invasion of it. So we wanted to just give even if folks are not part of the plant watch, since you're out on your lakes collecting other data, it's nice to have a little reminder about what this plant looks like. And in fact, it's not a plant at all. It's a macro algae. So it's an algae that's as big as a plant. So a large algae. So how do you tell what this plant compared to other species? Well, this one, as you can see from this illustration, they have these fishing line type structures near the bottom of the plant, like on the sediment and just below the sediment. And on these fishing lines, you can see these tiny little white cream colored structures called bulbils. When we zoom into that bulbil, what we can see is it looks like a star. So that's where it gets its name, starry stonewort. And so if you see this star on these clear filaments, that's starry stonewort. Always feel free to take a picture if you need some confirmation. Joe and I are always happy to help you confirm those. So this plant also is fairly brittle. It's brittle because if you squeeze any part of the plant, it pops. You'll feel it break in your hand and all of the contents come out of it. Well, that's because this area, instead of holding with my hands, I'll show you here. So right here is a node and here's a node. This part of the plant in between nodes is called the internode. Oh, shouldn't squeeze my thing. That is one cell. So if you put in your finger and you squeeze it, it breaks, all the contents come out. That's helpful because there is a very common, starry stonewort is part of a common group of plants called the stoneworts. And I should do it. I'm going to come back to that. And that group is called Cara, the musk grass, very common in many of our lakes. It's also a macroalgae. This is the one that if you've pulled up on your anchor or fishing line or whatever, and it really smells like lake, kind of skunky, kind of like lake sediment. That's Cara, that's musk grass. And this plant doesn't have star-shaped bulbils. If you do see some white structures, they're usually a ball. They are a little smaller, and if you squeeze them, they don't pop and drain out all of their contents either. I'll just show you one picture back of starry. Again, there's the clear filaments. There's that star-shaped bulbil. You oftentimes don't see it in this majestic standalone plant. Instead, you will pull it up in big chunks like this that look really messy. You can take these giant masses and break them down into really small things that fit into your hand because of those cells breaking. So we're in the middle of our presentation and hopefully no one's asleep, but just in case, here's the quiz. Which one is starry stonewort? A or B? Please put your answers into the chat. Joe, how are we looking with the chat?
It looks like people are awake and paying attention, so that's good. At first it was a little slow, but it's good to see the answers coming in. The majority is voting for A.
And that's right. A is the answer. You can see that star-shaped bulbil down here, where these also have bulbils, but as you can see, they look like little basketballs. That's not a good example. A baseball. How about a baseball? And these little structures that we're seeing on the branchlets themselves, those are the flowers of the algae. So just keep an eye out for this plant. If we find it all over, it starts to become a challenge to manage. So early detection is always best. So now I'll give over the controls to Joe.
All right, so we're going to move on to some reminders about, particularly for phosphorus and chlorophyll, which most of our lakes are involved with, especially the phosphorus. So just a few reminders. We've already had our turn-in for our spring phosphorus samples, which also included your May and June chlorophyll samples, if you're doing chlorophyll monitoring this year. And so there's a couple of quick reminders we want to point out. First of all, for planning ahead, your final chlorophyll sample is probably going to happen at a different time of the month than all the other ones. So if you're doing chlorophyll, you probably remember you collect monthly between the 10th and the 20th of each month. So your May sample is between May 10th and May 20th. Your June sample is between June 10th and June 20th. But your very last sample is going to be different. And we get a lot of people that just go, oh, it's September. I'll collect between the 10th and the 20th. And depending on where you are in the state, that might result in your sample being flagged as sampled at the wrong time or potentially even rejected. We want to avoid that. So be sure to check your schedule to find out when you're supposed to collect that last chlorophyll sample. It's set up so you can go out and actually take your summer phosphorus at the same time. So that actually makes it more convenient for you to check those schedules and make sure you're doing it at the right time. You can find your schedules on our MiCorps website, or it may be in the packet that was sent to you, but you can look on MiCorps.net. We'll show you where to find those. And another thing I'll also note is we have a new location for those of you in the Gaylord district for turn-in. We used to have you turn your samples in at the Eagle office, the former DEQ office. Now you're going to be turning it into the DNR office. And that information is for this whole year. It's listed on the schedule, the address and everything. It's quite close to the Eagle office, but it is a different location. And they have a freezer and everything ready to accept your samples. Next slide, please. So I mentioned where you will find your summer sampling schedule. You can just look right on the MiCorps website. If you click on the Lakes tab, and then see CLMP documents, like you can see in the image on the left side of your screen, that'll take you to the page that appears on the right-hand side of your screen, and you'll see there's places for phosphorus and chlorophyll. Please forgive us that the years are not updated. These are images from last year. So it says the 2022 sampling schedule on this screenshots that we're going to show you, but obviously when you go to the live website, it'll say 2023. Next slide. All right, sample drop-off. Remember that sample drop-off takes place between 8 a.m. and noon on your scheduled day. So be sure to, again, check those schedules. Make sure you arrive between 8 a.m. and noon. Now, I realize sometimes life gets in the way and it's impossible for you to make that time. So if you know in advance that drop-off time is not going to work for you, the first thing you can try is reach out to the contact person phone number on your sampling schedule. Some of our partners, the Eagle offices or other partners that staff our drop-off locations, can accept on a limited basis early samples, but you have to check first. They're not obligated to do that. They're already doing us a huge favor by accepting samples all around the state for the program, but they may have the capacity to accept your sample early. And if that's the case, you can make those arrangements directly with the drop-off location. You don't have to notify us about that. Just make sure you work with them. You may also think, oh, I know, so-and-so down the road at the lake near mine is also in the program. Maybe together, one person can drop off all our samples. That's always a smart way to avoid multiple trips down to the drop-off or over to the drop-off location. But at the very, if you find out afterwards, maybe you forgot and you missed and, turn-in was last week and, oh no, the samples are still in my freezer, or any other extenuating circumstances, please contact us because we have other ways. It may involve meeting up with you at some local location or having you send them directly to Michigan State, or, we can figure out other options for you. We definitely don't want you to go through all the effort to collect your samples and then not get them processed just because of the schedule. So definitely work with us or your drop-off location contact to find a way to deliver those samples. Never leave the samples just sitting outside somewhere. We've had that happen a few times where someone showed up, they thought they were at the right place and time for drop-off, but no one was around, so they just left them at the doorstep. That's not going to work. The samples will thaw, that ruins them. We can't process them at that case. So always make sure you're leaving them, with a person where they're safe and sound. Next slide. All right, some sampling reminders, how to handle your samples. Be sure to keep your samples clean. And one of the best ways to do that, to keep them from being contaminated, is to only use the containers we send you. This is an actual example of a phosphorus water sample that was sent to us several years ago. They lost their bottles, they couldn't find them, so they grabbed a cheese container out of the recycling bin and grabbed some water out of their lake and sent it in. There's a lot of phosphorus in cheese. So that rendered the sample not viable. We had to throw it out. If you lose your bottles, misplace them, let us know. We have extras. We can ship them to you quickly. We'll help you out with that. So be sure to use the containers. Don't put your fingers in them. Sometimes I know, take the cap off your container and maybe stick your finger in there to carry the bottle around. Don't put your finger in the container. They're sterile inside until you do that. So, only water should go into those phosphorus containers. The same thing for chlorophyll. Make sure you use the vials and everything that we provide to you.
Joe, as we're talking about phosphorus,
Yeah.
can you answer, when do we receive results of spring phosphorus?
Hey, great question. So all of your spring phosphorus samples have been submitted to the State of Michigan Laboratory for analysis. As you might imagine, there's a lot of them. There are about 300 of them that got turned in when you include all the samples and the replicate samples we get done. So it takes the state a while, and they just got them on Monday, the last set of them. And so it'll take a few weeks for them to get through everything. This is the busiest time of year for the state laboratory. But once we have all of the samples, we will post them on the MiCorps website. We'll shoot out an email to everyone to let you know that that report has been posted. In the meantime, if you have, and I don't mind this at all, if you're really eager to have that spring phosphorus results, maybe you have a Lake Association meeting coming up or something, feel free to email me. I do see the results as they come in, but we don't post them until they're all in. And so if your lake was one of the earlier ones to get to the lab, then you might get your samples a little sooner, and I'm happy to shoot you an email with your results. But we will let y'all know when the full report of results is posted.
And Joe, just finishing it up with one more, but about summer phosphorus. When should we expect to receive our summer phosphorus testing supplies?
Oh, those are going out right now. They go out in the mail in tiers. So our volunteers in the UP are the first on the schedule to do their sampling. They do their sampling in late August. So those have already been sent out. And then over the next week or two, we'll be sending them down through the state, ending with our southernmost counties, because you guys are last on the schedule. So keep an eye on your mail. We're working on that right now. All right. More reminders. This happens every time. We had quite a few samples this spring come in where the labels were completely illegible. If you use a pen that is not waterproof, or if you try and write on something that's already really wet, by the time they get to us, they look like this. We can't read them at all. And that is a problem, especially if they are not in a Ziploc bag with their data form. If it's with the data form, then we know, okay, this is obviously, Dead Spider Lake, because here's Dead Spider Lake's data form. And so we know that that's what we're looking at. But if the data sheet is in a separate container, or you forget completely to include a copy of your data sheet, remember, always include a copy of your data sheet, we have no idea whose lake this is, and we have to throw it out because we have no clues of where this came from. We were able to figure out all of the poorly labeled samples that came in this time. We didn't have to reject any this time, but we certainly have in the past. So make sure that you've got it labeled where we can read it and it's not washed off. All right, chlorophyll reminder. For those of you doing chlorophyll, got a great photo of Tamara there from our Eagle project lead here at a side-by-side recently, where she was filtering her chlorophyll sample alongside the volunteer. And, she made the observation, and Eric and I have both seen this before too, is that sometimes, especially if you have a really clear lake, it's very easy to do your filtration. And so you may, just be like, go and do it really fast. Just push that plunger down and squirt the water through. Look, that was quick and easy. But if you remember your training, that's not the way you're supposed to do it. There's actually a particular pressure that we're trying to emulate, and you might remember, and you can always review our training videos, we'll talk about those later, on how to do it. But what you want to go for when you're pushing down your plunger is that the water is coming out of the filter at a rapid drip rate. It shouldn't be a solid stream of water. It should be like drip, 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 a fast drip rate. That's what you're looking to do. If you push it harder than that, you've got a couple of problems that can happen. One of them is it may actually blow a hole through the filter. And when you actually open up your filtration device, you may find that your filter is damaged because of too much pressure being applied by that water you are shoving through with your plunger. So we don't want to damage the filter, because you may lose some of your sample. The other thing that can happen is it can actually damage the chlorophyll itself. Too high of pressure can actually force that chlorophyll to be damaged to the point where it isn't picked up by our analytical equipment. So you don't want to jet that water through the plunger. Just do it at a rapid drip rate and you'll be in great shape. So that's a technique reminder for chlorophyll. All right, chlorophyll. Probably the biggest problem we run into with chlorophyll is using the separator sheets instead of the filters. And of course, we go over this in training, and you may find that you need to look closely at your filters that come. They're the little discs, and for the filter itself is solid white. You can't see through it. Almost looks like a little sheet of circular white plastic. The separator sheets that protect them from each other and from getting stuck together are kind of see-through. They sort of look like tissue paper. And the ones we're sending out this year, they're blue. They're a pale blue, but they're definitely, don't use the blue tissuey looking separator sheets as a filter. You may actually get them to work. You may, if you tried this, water will go through. But it's not working correctly. You're missing a lot of the chlorophyll that you're supposed to be capturing if you were using the filter. So a lot of times we don't notice this until they get to the laboratory. When the laboratory goes to process the samples, what happens is the separator sheet doesn't dissolve in the solvents that they use, and it actually gums up the works. And then they notify us that this sample was not done correctly. And so that gives us the sad news that we have to share with the volunteer that we had to throw out the sample because it was done incorrectly. So always double check, look for the white filter and use that for your samples. Blue equals bad. Another thing that we catch, and there was a couple this spring with the May and June samples, is that the chlorophyll vials with the filters inside them were not wrapped in foil. That is critical. Chlorophyll is, reacts with light. That's how it works, right? You have chlorophyll to react with sunlight to make energy for the algae and any other plant that has chlorophyll. So it's still reactive even in a water sample. So if it's exposed to light, even in your water sample, it will degrade over time. So you have to wrap it in foil. If we open, another thing that makes us sad, right, is we're going through everyone's samples and we open up a Ziploc and we see vials with no foil around them. They go directly into the trash because we absolutely know that would give you bad data, and we want you to have good data. Just for fun though, click through, Eric. Yeah, don't have to wrap your phosphorus in foil. It's okay if you do, it doesn't hurt it, but we do sometimes get phosphorus bottles also wrapped in foil. It's unnecessary. So save your foil for your chlorophyll. All right, moving on, data forms. Every year, important reminder, fill out everything on your data form, including the back. 99% of our volunteers do a great job filling out the front of the data form. I'd say 80% of our volunteers, maybe a little less, do a good job filling out the back. And the back is actually pretty easy. All you need to do is two things. Draw a map of your lake showing where you sample and give us the surface area of your lake. That map is really important. And look, I get it. It gets a little annoying after a while. It's like, I've drawn this map a million times. I've been in the program for 15 years. Some of you, it seems like a lot, but it's so useful for us because if we have questions about maybe there's a change in the sampling location, or we have confusion about which long lake the volunteer is referring to, or we want to go back 10 years, 20 years and make sure that the sample location hasn't changed. If there's no map, we have no idea. And that compromises the quality of our data. So many of our volunteers, you may do this too, just attach a copy of a lake map that you have and you draw an X on it. It doesn't have to go in this little box. You can just staple a lake map on or include it with your data sheet in the Ziploc bag. That's fine. But we really need that map. So please remember to include the map. Even if it's simple, it doesn't have to be exact tracing of your lake's outline, even just a general shape, quick and dirty, that will help us immensely. So please fill out both sides of your data sheet. All right, dissolved oxygen. I know several of you are doing dissolved oxygen and temperature monitoring. Just a few quick reminders to help you be successful. First of all, be sure to turn on your meter about 15 minutes before you're planning to do the calibration steps that you know how to do. It helps the meter itself to stabilize, and calibration will work a lot easier for you instead of turning it on and immediately trying to calibrate it. So let it sit there for about 15 minutes. The batteries are good. They're not going to die on you. Just let it sit there and do your calibration about 15 minutes after you turned it on. Be sure to keep the sponge in the calibration chamber moist, but no standing water. It shouldn't be sitting in a chamber full of water. Just make sure that sponge stays moist. And then make sure that when you record and report your readings, that your oxygen is reading in milligrams per liter and not percent saturation. And then also make sure you're recording temperature in Celsius degrees and not Fahrenheit. That'll help you when you go to enter your data, because that's how it will accept your data. So those are your big reminders for dissolved oxygen. Another thing we want to remind you all of that are doing dissolved oxygen, this is our last slide about dissolved oxygen, is that it's important to be measuring in the right place, right? So sometimes folks want to, go out to their monitoring location and don't put down an anchor. It's really important to put down an anchor. I know sometimes that means a lot of anchor rope because you might have a pretty deep lake, but no matter what the depth of your lake is, it's going to take several minutes. It's going to take some time to take those dissolved oxygen measurements throughout the whole water column. Your boat will move, even if it's pretty calm. And that does cause some problems, especially for understanding the depth of your lake. So if you go and take your boat and you're sitting right on top of that deep spot when you start, but if you don't anchor, you may drift into shallower areas. And that means when you're down at the bottom of the lake, taking your deeper measurements, your probe may actually be sitting on the bottom of the lake. Maybe you were in a 50-foot spot, but while you were measuring, you drifted over into 35 feet. You might think, oh, I need to keep taking measurements, and your probe is sitting on the bottom and it's giving you misleading measurements. You don't want your probe to hit the bottom for a lot of reasons. It can even damage the probe. So make sure you anchor yourself, check your depth, make sure you're in the right spot, and make sure you're staying put through that measurement. It's really important. All right, one quick one for all of you who are measuring SECI, which I imagine is almost, if not all of you on the call today. It's another quick quiz for you. So we've got the chat open there. We want to know, from what point do you record your SECI depth measurement? Maybe Eric can help with his cursor there and say, for choice A, do you take the measurement on the tape right there off the top edge of your boat? Or do you take the measurement at the surface of the water? Is that what you record? A or B? I see the chat answers coming in. We'll wait for a few more people. Do you measure from the top of the boat or the top of the water?
Everyone's entering.
Yes,
Top
you guys
of
are
the
rock
water.
stars. You got it right. That's right. It needs to be measured from the top of the water. We did observe one case, just one, but we want to make sure this isn't happening elsewhere, where the volunteer was measuring from the top edge of their boat. And obviously that's incorrect. You want to know how far down from the water's surface you can see that SECI disc, not how far from the top edge of your boat railing. So good job. You did great. But yeah, so let's move on. Just one little final reminder in our slideshow here today is just to remind you that we, of course, record all of our online training sessions. And so you can go onto the MiCorps website, click on that Lakes tab, go down to the 2023 Lake Training link, click on that. And as you scroll down, you'll find recordings of every parameter training that you can watch at your leisure, or for a refresher, or to share with your assisting volunteers that might join mid-season. We also have PDF copies of all the slides that we use. So if you'd rather have a hard copy of some of the stuff that we present through the training, that's all there for you too. So, and then of course, you can contact us. So on our final slide here, we'll throw up some contact information for all of us, Eric and myself. Jean Roth, who can help you with questions about anything that's mailed to you. She's definitely, managing all of that. There was questions before about phosphorus bottles. If you're like, it's the day before I'm supposed to sample and I haven't got my bottles yet, she can contact Jean about that. Tamara with Eagle, she coordinates a lot of different, our side-by-sides, and particularly dissolved oxygen, those meters. She's our expert on those meters. So if you have any questions about your dissolved oxygen meters, and many other things, Tamara's a great contact for that. But of course, you don't have to keep track of all that if you don't want to. Just keep track of MiCorps@msu.edu. And if you email that, we take a look at that account every single day and we will answer it or get it to the person who can. So that is your one-stop shop for any questions related to your monitoring.
Excellent. Thanks, Joe. We've had a couple questions come in that I can start off answering, and then we'll go from there. So this one is for starry stonewort. I'll answer this one. Are the bulbils on starry stonewort always present, or do they develop later or disappear before the rest of the algae dies? What it looks like is that those bulbils can be present all the time. The one thing is that when that rake goes over, sometimes it's quick that you quickly break off all the sediment from it, and you might dislodge some of those stars because they are at the sediment, in the sediment or right on top. And so you'll want to look at that, be gentle when you're taking off that sediment, because that's maybe where you'll see the stars.
I'd add to that too, though, there's times where you just don't see them. I've definitely collected it.
Yeah.
And they're in my sample, and it was definitely starry stonewort, but there were no stars to be found. So, I would caution, don't assume that it's not starry stonewort if there are no stars. But the first thing I would say, if I thought it was starry stonewort, but I didn't see any stars, is do some more sampling in that place, because there's a good chance you'll find some. But if not, there's those other characteristics that Eric showed you before.
Yeah, and I'll say that's a really good point for starting around now when starry stonewort becomes very dense. And your sampling rake, if you've all seen Joe and I wield those around during trainings, they might even just land on top of the starry and not get down to the bottom. A question about Secchi. Why do you recommend 10-4 for Secchi disc sampling? Is it scientific, or is there some other reason? I'll take this one as a quick one. Is that it is a scientific reason. The angle of the sun is really low in the sky early in the morning and late in the afternoon, evening. And so we like to create some consistent conditions that we have between 10 and 4. Okay, so, well, Joe, if you want to answer this one. What is the origin and significance of the error bars associated with the historical data graphs of chlorophyll A in the individual lake reports? And why are there none for the phosphorus?
Well, there's this question from a scientist. I have some guesses of who asked that without looking, but I appreciate it. And so I'd have to pull up those reports to make sure I was right on that. But I think the error bars represent one standard deviation from the average that was collected. But I'll be honest, I need to double check, because Paul Steen from our team creates those every year, and people rarely ask about them. So I'm not going to say for sure what they are, but I'm happy to look into that.
Yeah, I'll take a peek too. I think it might be the spread of points. So chlorophyll A, when you see those individual lake reports, they are the averages. That's what the mean. And then so Joe will look into it, but yeah, it'll probably show the spread of points since you collected it through May to, through August, September. Where total phosphorus, there are none, because we don't take, there's one spring and there's one sample for summer, and they're not averaged. Those are absolute numbers.
Right. So we just gave two different answers of what it might mean. So
Yep.
I'm going to take a peek here and see if I can determine that.
Perfect.
Because you're right. It might be the range as well.
Are there any other? I think
What about the
I've got your answer. I'm looking at them right now, and the footnote says vertical bars indicate standard deviation. So I was right. Eric was wrong.
Oh.
So that's what it means.
what about the phosphorus? Why are there no error bars?
Why are there no error bars on summer phosphorus? I'm gonna say because that's the absolute value, right? It's for each year. And so there's only
That's right.
one sample for each point. Each point only represents one sample rather than a median of multiple samples.
But
There's no standard deviation of one sample, right? That's the
one sample, but what about the spread associated with the method error?
That's not represented.
Yeah.
It's just the straight up value. We don't have a representation of method error in these reports. And Tom, I had a guess that it might be you asking the question. So I feel good about that. It's a good question.
Well, what is the magnitude of the method error for phosphorus?
That is in our QAP, our quality assurance project plan. I don't have it at the tip of my tongue, but that is posted on our website. So if we have a chance, I might try and look it up while we're on today. But yeah, we do report that in our quality assurance plan.
All right, thanks.
Sure.
Are there any other questions? And I'm just going to scan to see if there was any more written that we haven't answered. Not seeing any so far. So while Joe's looking for that, it looks like that. Any other questions? Hopefully you're late. This has been a very interesting year for large chunks of the state where ice maybe was barely formed in southern Michigan lakes. The drought-like conditions that we had for the first part of the summer season was really interesting. So it'll be interesting to see our data compared to other years. That'll be a really interesting comparison once that starts coming in. All right, I'll say Tamara and Jean, the two of you are on the call. Are there any other things you would like to note for folks in the middle of the season?
Hi, this is Tamara here. I have done a few side-by-sides, not many, but I had one recently where there was an error in how deep they were doing the integrated sample for chlorophyll. And I just want to remind everyone that it's 2 times the Secchi depth.
Does that make sense for everyone? You take the Secchi right before sampling and then double that, and that's how far you go with your sampler. And I see from Jean, she doesn't have anything to say other than just keep on keeping on. Thanks, Jean. And Joe, any
No,
luck quickly
I
finding it?
I'm going to have to reply to Tom separately on that question. But we can do that. I know how to find him.
For sure. All right, everybody. I'll just give one more moment for anyone to have any other questions.
I'll just take a second to thank everybody for participating in the program. That Eagle really appreciates it, and we do use the data. We can get to maybe, a dozen lakes a year if we're lucky, and we have almost 300 people participating in the program. And it's just fantastic amount of data that people are collecting, and just also just good for my soul that there are so many good people out in Michigan caring about our water.
For sure, I'll echo that. We are currently at 301 basins that are being monitored this year, which is a great number and is the second highest we've ever had in the program. And that's a lot of data. And thank you all for being a part of that.
This will all be recorded. Of course, we're recording this session. And so we will get it all cleaned up and edited, posted up on the MiCorps website, and we'll let people know that it's been posted. Especially, I know some folks that signed up for this were unable to join live, but it's also, nice to go back and, I know I do that. Like, what did they say about X or Y? You can pull back that recording and review it at your leisure.
Okay. Thanks, everybody, and happy sampling.
Thanks, everyone.